and I am the Associate Vice President for Research at Kansas State University. If you have tuned into this show previously and were expecting to see its regular host, Dr. Phaedra Corso, she is unfortunately tending to some pressing family matters today, but extends her warm greetings to all of you. In her place, my colleague, Evelina Sterling, and I will be serving as co-hosts of this show. So welcome to KSU's Research with Relevance Friday features. Our goal with these features is to highlight some of the outstanding faculty here at KSU and also stay engaged as a community of scholars and researchers. Today is the sixth show of the fall season with shows scheduled through early December. And during the previous one, we had featured ant biologist Clint Pennick from the College of Science and Mathematics. And he shared his research on the evolution and ecological success of ants and bees. Today, we will be interacting with two faculty who belong to the same college. Now, a few housekeeping tips before we start. First, please make sure that your mics are muted until the part of the show when we open it up for questions from attendees. Second, if you want to be able to focus on a particular speaker, and again, there are two today, you can search for their names in the list of participants and then pin the speaker by clicking on the three dots next to their name. Finally, this episode will be recorded and be available through Kansas State's Office of Research and through our YouTube channel. For the rest of this hour, our schedule includes watching a video that gives an overview of the research of our featured faculty members, and they are Sarah Guindre-Parker and Glenn Young. Then we will do a live interview with them about their research before we open it up to all attendees to ask questions. If you have a question you would like to ask, please signify this by either sending a note through the chats feature if you have access to it, or else raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, whichever one works best for you. All right, so let's begin. We are happy to welcome Dr. Sarah Guindre-Parker and Dr. Glenn Young, and they are both from the College of Science and Mathematics. Although they have been at KSU for only a year, they have already made significant strides in bringing more awareness to the possibilities of interdisciplinary research opportunities. So first, some information about Sarah. She is an assistant professor of biology in the Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Organismal Biology. As a behavioral ecologist, she studies how European starlings cope with changing environments on both surface and cellular levels through their breeding, their behavior, or their physiology. Shortly after arriving in Georgia, she established a colony of nest boxes at the KSU field station to monitor behavior and the reproductive success of these birds. She earned her PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology from Columbia University. Then we also have Glenn, who is an assistant professor of mathematics in the Department of Mathematics. And as an applied mathematician, his research areas of interest include mathematical ecology and evolutional game theory, with most of his work inspired by biology. His research is largely concerned with the development and analysis of mathematical models that capture and make accessible important aspects of physical systems. And he earned a PhD in mathematics from the University of Pittsburgh. Now, we are going to watch a short video about the research project after which my colleague, Evelina Sterling, will host the question and answer part of the show. And let me thank Tom Ball from our office for producing these great videos. Heather, the video, please.
My name is Sarah Guindre-Parker, and I am an assistant professor of biology in the College of Science and Mathematics.
My name is Glenn Young, and I'm an assistant professor of mathematics in the College of Science and Mathematics.
I became involved in research in high school as part of my International Baccalaureate program. I had a great biology teacher and decided to pursue my independent project with her. It wasn't until I became involved in studying animal behavior in the field as an undergraduate student that my career path really clicked for me. I loved being outside and observing animals in their habitats.
I was first introduced to mathematical biology through a National Science Foundation funded program called Research Experiences for Undergraduates while I was a student at James Madison University in Virginia. This experience led me to the University of Pittsburgh for graduate school, where I was able to study a handful of very interesting problems in epidemiology and immunology. During my postdoctoral fellowship at Penn State University, I began studying mathematical ecology, which is the current focus of my research.
Our current research explores how animals cope with challenges in their environments. In many animal societies, individuals come together to help raise offspring that are not their own. This arrangement is called cooperative breeding, and parents obviously benefit from receiving help because, as any new parent can confirm, caring for young is quite costly. The motivation for the helpers, however, is a long-standing puzzle in evolutionary biology. These individuals are taking on the cost of caring for young without the fitness benefits of reproducing themselves. Cooperative breeding species of birds and mammals, including humans, are most often found in environments where resources are unpredictable. One hypothesis to explain this pattern is that the costs of raising young are amplified under harsh conditions, and assistance from others is necessary to overcome these high costs of reproduction. This is a line of research I became interested in during my PhD program at Columbia University, where I studied a cooperatively breeding bird called the superb starling. Superb starlings live in East Africa in large social groups of up to 60 birds, and in each group, several dominant pairs will breed with helpers at their nests. I wanted to test whether starlings pay a cost of reproduction where birds that care for young to a greater extent have shorter lifespans as a result. I was especially interested in whether breeding under harsh years with low rainfall led to a greater cost of reproduction. However, this proved quite difficult to study as a field biologist. When I met Glenn, I quickly realized that our interests overlapped perfectly to tackle this question in a new way. The hypotheses I cannot test in the field are ones we can address using a mathematical model.
The mathematics of decision-making is strongly rooted in game theory, which can be defined as the study of optimal strategies among players in competitive interactions. In the 1970s, geneticists John Maynard Smith and George Price realized that the central idea behind game theory, that rational individuals should make decisions that maximize their own payout, is consistent with the theory of evolution, namely that fitness-increasing mutations will generally be selected for. The pair developed what became known as evolutionary game theory, which formed a foundation for the theoretical study of decision-making in biological systems. The natural question that mathematical biologists have addressed using these models is about cooperation. Given that cooperating comes at a personal cost, why would any rational individual choose to do so? Evolutionary game theoretic models show us that cooperation is advantageous if the direct or indirect benefits outweigh the individual costs of cooperating. More recently, theorists have asked questions about the influence of environmental feedback on decision-making. For example, how does an uncertain environment influence the decision of whether or not to act cooperatively? Questions like this led to the development of so-called eco-evolutionary models. This new class of model couples evolutionary game theory with simple models of the environment. I was incredibly excited when Sarah told me about her work with superb starlings. Here's a cooperative species that seems to make decisions largely based on environmental cues, and the environment is highly variable. This fits perfectly into a mathematical framework that I find intrinsically interesting. Over the next few months, Sarah and I built a mathematical model of decision-making among superb starlings that incorporates the effects of a randomly changing environment. By simply adjusting parameters within this model, we can explore the effects of costly reproduction, environmental variability, and social group size on cooperative behavior and group survival.
Climate change is making the world increasingly unpredictable, where sudden hurricanes or droughts are occurring more commonly than before. Understanding the strategies that help societies cope with uncertain environments is critical in light of our new reality. Our mathematical model will allow us to better understand the interplay between costly reproduction and the benefits of cooperation in an uncertain world. It takes a village, especially in precarious times.
Thanks. Wow, that was really fascinating, Sarah and Glenn, not only with the content area around the starlings, but also your interdisciplinary approach, integrating both biology and math. So I have some questions for you to get started. I'll start off with some questions and then we'll open it up to the audience. If anybody has a question, feel free to speak up, or you can put it in the chat and we'll read that. To get us started, tell us a little bit about your path to KSU. How did you come to KSU? Sarah, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. Thanks for calling on us. Sometimes we get confused.
I know.
Thanks so much for having us and for hosting this. This is fantastic to participate in. So my path to KSU really began with undergrad research. I got involved in doing research, and when I figured out I loved studying animal behavior and birds, I sort of knew it made sense. I wanted to be a researcher and get involved with mentoring and teaching students. So the number one thing I was looking for in a faculty position was the ability to work and mentor students in learning about the research process and conducting their own independent research. And KSU emphasizes undergrad student research in a way that was really impressive. They support students through various types of awards and grants, and they pair faculty with students through various programs, which is really fantastic. The other thing that really drew me to the biology departments at KSU, though, was the graduate program that they have. The Masters of Science in Integrative Biology is also incredibly cool. A lot of the work that I do, I consider to be integrative biology, where I bring together different subfields of biology. I like to study animal behavior, but we also do physiology and endocrinology. And so here is a graduate program that trains students in all of these different subfields of biology all at once. And so I've been able to recruit fantastic students in my lab through that program. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the field station is also a draw. It's a really great resource for researchers like me. We can bring students out on field trips and conduct research there.
Yes, the field station is an outstanding resource that we have here at KSU. And if anybody has not seen the field station, it's only a couple miles away. You can find more information on our Office of Research website, but I really encourage you to visit the field station if you have not already. Glenn, how about you? How did you come to KSU?
I suppose my path wasn't so different. I also got started with research pretty early. I started research when I was a sophomore in undergrad in a physics lab, but that went poorly, so I switched over to math, and that went better. You know, around the time I was late undergrad, I kind of realized that this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to do math research. I wanted to teach, and so that was always the goal through grad school, through my postdoc, and everything. And then when I came to visit KSU, the school just, you know, it made a great impression because one, it's massive. It's the kind of school that I like. I like big universities, and I also like public universities, but that's not necessarily related to my career. I'm just a big proponent of public education. The other thing is that the math department here made a great impression. Everybody is there's a lot of help from senior faculty. There's a lot of opportunity for, you know, undergraduate research, and then the other thing that was really important to me when picking a university to work for was the biology department, because my research is in
mathematical biology. And the fact that we have a separate department for ecology and evolution is kind of a dream come true for me. That's probably enough of an answer.
No, that's great. So both of you are new faculty. So tell us a little bit about why you think it's so important to get started with research early. Glenn, I'll start with you this time.
Oh, sure. So I touched on this in my last answer. So I started research early. And this is the only reason I know that I liked research, because going into undergrad, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I started out as a chemistry major, and that fell apart quickly. And then I worked in a physics lab, and that fell apart quickly. And then I landed on math thinking, well, I like the theory behind these subjects, maybe not the lab part of these subjects. And then I got involved in research, and I loved it. I loved it, loved it, loved it. And that set forth my my career path from there on out. And I still remember the solicitation email for the program that I applied to when I got into research. It was an NSF-funded program called a Research Experience for Undergrad through my undergraduate university, James Madison University. And I remember the solicitation email. The professor who sent out the email said, you know, the monetary value of this experience is however many dollars it was, but the overall experience could be invaluable. And I still think about that because it really was. And I keep thinking I should email him and tell him how invaluable this was, but I can't imagine he remembers writing that email. So, the experience for me as an undergraduate researcher getting into this early on, defined my whole career. And so, the earlier students get involved in research, the better, because then they can make decisions about what they want to do in the next step. They can prepare better for, whether they want to go into industry, whether they realize research isn't for them, they want to go into industry, or for whether they want to target grad school. And another thing that I've only recently learned through the first year scholar program at Kennesaw is that students who get involved in undergraduate research early on just have much higher success rates, which is pretty remarkable. So there's an additional benefit there.
Mm-hmm. Great. And you both have talked about the importance of undergraduate research, both as you all participating in undergraduate research, as well as working with new undergraduate students at KSU. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that in terms of how undergraduate research has influenced your own position as a researcher now?
Sure. You mean from my own past experiences?
Yeah, kind of both. Your own past experiences, as well as how you're cultivating this next generation of undergraduate research to hopefully, become, academic or, biology or math researchers.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say my answer probably mirrors what Glenn said as well. I think the benefit for me of getting involved in research early on was that I got to try all kinds of things I didn't love until I figured out what I did love. So I worked on barnacles, I worked on beetles, I worked on plants, and then someone handed me a bird and I figured it out. And before the moment where I actually worked on a bird, I thought I was going to be a pre-med. I was on the pre-med track. I thought I was going to be a medical doctor because I liked biology, and that was the obvious path forward. And so early research experiences were a cool way to sort of pay the bills in a related field to what I liked, but it really, starting early allowed me to try different things and figure out what I liked. Mm-hmm. It has definitely shaped the way that my career has progressed, because one of my favorite things about this career is working with undergrad students and mentoring them in research opportunities. And it's really shifted gears completely for me from the previous work I've done in the past that tended to be more international at faraway field sites where they're difficult to access and it's just less accessible to the average student. And so now a lot of the research that I've been developing at KSU in the past year is very local, because that allows me to bring a lot more students out to the field and learn about animal behavior with me. And so it has really shaped the way that my whole research program has gone, just to facilitate bringing classes and bringing undergraduate researchers to my field sites with me.
Great. And I see Ian Ferguson has his hand up. So Ian, if you want to jump in with your question.
Let me see. I'm incompetent. I got too many buttons to press here. So I've worked with some people who've done bird and animal stuff in the past at St Andrews. They came out of Krebs Group from Oxford, and like zebra and Bengalese finch song. It's kind of interesting how it develops. But my question is a little bit more philosophical, which I've never really been able to answer for me. So like Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker, was some of the first modeling that people have done to show how randomness can create order. So my question is, why do random systems create localized order in animal populations? If you could answer that, you're doing better than them. I'll let Glenn start since he's the modeler, and I understand chaotic systems because I've looked at starling blood flow and flocking in that. So when I first saw the thing, these are smaller groups, so I assume you get flocking as well, but that's a different question if somebody else doesn't ask one. But I'll let Glenn answer the philosophical, and you can maybe talk about Dawkins' work. His work's actually fairly interesting.
Sure. So your question was, why do we see this order through randomness?
Yes, that's right.
This is sort of a very general question. So
that's why I said it was somewhat philosophical, but
yeah,
it maps into a practical system in animal systems.
You're
right?
Absolutely right.
And something that's measurable, yeah.
It does map onto this. You're right. So it entirely depends what you mean. So there's.
I thought I explained what I meant. So you tell me what I mean.
So it depends what you mean by random. So it's pretty well established in, say, statistical mechanics or in various fields of mathematics that you can get various types of order through random processes. I mean, that's the whole idea of studying stochastic processes, right? You have some degree of randomness, and randomness is defined within the problem, but there's always some underlying, probability distribution or something like this, and we get things like just through, I understand this more as a mathematician, but through certain kinds of what are called bifurcations. So, as the influence of something is outweighing something else, you end up with what are often called patterns if you're talking about anything spatial. Or so I don't really know how in depth you want me to go with the mathematics of a bifurcation.
I know Mandelbrot stuff. I've looked at coupled, but we're more interested in why does it work out in for example, in a bird population, and what's the benefit there? So why was there a mathematical driver to end up with this particular distribution of starlings, and then how are you testing that from the mathematical perspective, and then also from what you're observing? But again, I don't need to dominate the discussion. We can meet over lunch and talk about some of this in more detail at another time.
Yeah, that would be great. But so I'll give you a short answer. The short answer is that the same principles that guide, say, the math behind forming the Mandelbrot set, or the same principles behind, a lot of stuff from physics, a lot of mechanics or electrical E&M, electricity and magnetism. A lot of the same principles, turns out, govern the dynamics of biological systems. And this is the crux of all of my research. We use essentially we borrow ideas from physics and chemistry and then mathematics to write down these models that mirror in a lot of ways the same types of models you think about in say physics or in chemistry or elsewhere. And it turns out they do a very good job, where good is defined case by case, of capturing the dynamics of these biological systems. And so the types of behaviors that you see where you get the Mandelbrot study, where you get this order through chaos, is you will see similar things from biological systems, if they're chaotic systems. I don't know. I can't name off the top of my head a chaotic bird system, but I can imagine that the formation of a mummeration or something like this could be pretty chaotic.
Right, but that then comes back to an issue of correlation isn't causation. So I'll throw that over to Sarah and say, how do you differentiate the two, right, in a mathematical model that's relevant to what you're studying? And does the model become predictive? And at that point, I'm going to sign off and sup my coffee and let somebody else talk.
So the goal is that everything will be iterative. So the model will inform future experiments, and then future experiments will be used to refine the model. And so it will be a nice long-term collaboration, and we can go back and forth testing things in the field and in our models.
I would definitely encourage Glenn and Sarah to take Ian up on his offer for lunch. He's a fabulous person to talk with. Always entertaining and interesting at the same time.
If anything, you'll get fed through the process because I'll cover the cost of lunch, yeah.
Well, I wanted to piggyback on some of Ian's comments and some of your discussion about this, because there might be some other decision science researchers on the call today. And tell me a little bit about how you validate your models. Who wants to start?
Do you want to go, Sarah?
Sure, I can give it a start, and then Glenn can complete my answer. So there's sort of like I just sort of explained, the process is hopefully going to be iterative, and the information that we have about superb starlings from watching them almost 20 years now in Kenya can be used to come up with a lot of the baseline parameters that we need to set in place in our model, so that the model is actually going to reflect something realistic that we might see in a bird population. The goal is not to feed too much data into the model just yet. It's not a statistical analysis. We do want the model to be its own independent tool that can teach us new things besides what the data that we already have can say. And so we might use it to parameterize things like the maximum lifespan of a bird. So we might cap that based on what we know and what we see in nature, which is about 15 years in the superb starling. So they can be quite long-lived. And then once we have the model developed and we feel like it's reflective of the actual bird population that we might see, then we can start changing parameters that I cannot change in the field. Like I can't go ahead and manipulate rainfall for several years in a row. I'm just not that good of a field biologist on that large of a scale. And so the model can allow us to do these experiments that we can't do in the field. And then based on our model results, we can then develop new targeted experiments that might be more manageable. So I might be able to manipulate how much food a couple birds get. I can't manipulate rainfall on a whole continent.
Mm-hmm. Good. Glenn, do you have anything to add?
No, that was perfect. I mean, I could add some stuff, but it would be very pedantic. And I think that was a very, very good answer.
Well, I actually have another question. Probably Sarah can start this one. You've said a few times that the starlings are from Kenya. So how does Georgia come into play here?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So this is a system I worked on really because my PhD advisor had a lot of long-term observations on these birds, and they were really well suited to study how variable environments or stochastic environments shape animal behavior, because they live in one of the world's most unpredictable environments in African savannas. And so it was really worth my time for my PhD to do a lot of fieldwork and study these birds. But as I pointed out, one of the problems is that it's really hard to bring large groups of undergrad students out to Kenya every year while they're also taking classes during the springtime when the birds are breeding. And so it just really limited my ability to work with students. And so I sort of switched gears, asking very similar questions in another starling that we have here in North America, the European starling or the common starling. And so I'm still interested in understanding how different environmental conditions shape animal behavior and reproductive success and survival across habitat types. But here, the starlings don't face as drastic variation in rainfall like the African starlings. They mainly face completely altered habitats because of humans. And so here we're really working across an urban to rural environmental gradient, and we're looking at how animal behavior and physiology and reproductive success is shaped by human activities and urbanization.
Great. Well, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about money. So how is your research funded? Glenn, I'll let you start this one.
Sure. So the work that Sarah and I are working on, we were fortunate enough to get a seed grant through the Office of Research. So that funds us through fiscal year 21, so the end of this coming summer. So that's where we're currently getting funding, and then the ideal will be that once we start turning out some nice results and we maybe get a publication, then will apply for external funding. And I think maybe the most likely first target for external funding will be the NSF, because the NSF does a lot of collaborative. They fund a lot of collaborative projects. They even have a mathematical biology as one of their divisions within the Division of Mathematical Sciences. So there's quite a few avenues within the NSF alone that we could pursue. I think that's the most likely one we're going to go for once we get some results. I can let Sarah add to that.
Yeah, Sarah, is there anybody else who might be interested in supporting your research?
Some of the sort of local bird research, if we put a spin on it, like we're studying animal behavior or physiology or health, we can definitely apply to a variety of other sources of funding and foundations that are interested in wildlife health. So depending on what our follow-up experiments might be, there might be other sources of funding. But one other thing that Glenn and I have talked about, which would tie in really well with our collaborative work, is also to seek funding to support undergraduate student researchers that could do cross-disciplinary research just the way that we are doing it. And so we would love to have a couple of summer students that are co-supervised between mathematics and biology, doing independent research at this really exciting sort of cross-disciplinary boundary with us.
And what are your ultimate long-term goals of this research? I know you've kind of talked about the content as well as the undergraduate research component, but what are your long-term goals?
Do you want me to start this one?
You can start that one, Glenn.
All right, so I think the long-term goals of this specific project, I mean, ideally this will blossom into some long-standing collaboration. We'll get a bunch of good results, get super famous, get funded a whole bunch, all that good stuff. But for the another big idea that we have that we can use this project as sort of a springboard off of is what Sarah was just talking about, where we can hopefully within the next, I don't know how many years long goal this is, but over the next so many years, we can hopefully establish sort of an interdisciplinary math biology research group where we can make this an annual every summer thing. If we get this funded through like an REU type program, then we can bring in students who study, maybe they work in teams, a biology student and a math student, who work on these interdisciplinary projects for a summer, and get that experience. And so, if we can establish something like that that's ongoing, that becomes part of the research infrastructure of KSU, that would be phenomenal. That would be the greatest outcome of this research.
Mm-hmm. And as you know, one of KSU's overarching research themes is safe and sustainable communities. Can you talk a little bit about the implications of your research on humans?
Yeah, sure. So human societies are actually not all that different than some of the behaviors and societies we see in other groups of animals like birds. And so many human societies also show a lot of cooperative behaviors or cooperative raising of young. And so there's actually a really cool new paper that was published this summer that finds the exact same pattern in human societies, where societies that are more cooperative tend to be found in less predictable or more uncertain environments. So that same pattern that we see in birds and mammals all across the world also holds in humans. And so the research that we're doing now is really applicable to any society that has some kind of variation in how social they are or how much they cooperate during reproduction. And so the results that we have are probably broadly applicable to a lot of other vertebrates, including humans, that show that same type of cooperation during breeding.
Great. And we actually have a question from President Witten. She wants to know, have you found creative ways to bring in lessons from your research into the classroom?
Sure, I can start with that. I love combining research and teaching. It's one of my new favorite things at KSU, and I love that that's emphasized and supported at KSU. And so one of the things I've been doing, especially because of COVID-19, which sort of impacted my field season in the springtime, I wasn't able to have as many students in the field at one time with me. I set up these little nest cams at all my nest boxes. So I recorded bird behavior, so the parents coming in and out of the nest box caring for their young. And so this is something that my vertebrate zoology students are analyzing right now. It's due tonight. They're going through all the videos. They're recording animal behavior observations. So they weren't able to be in the field physically themselves, but they're able to look at field animal behavior recordings. And then next week, we're going to generate hypotheses about all the different factors in an animal's environment that might influence their parental care decisions. And it's really closely related with some of the modules we're covering in lecture. So there's all kinds of really exciting ways that I envision my research and teaching really melding together in the future.
Great. And Glenn, how do you integrate this into math, your math classes that you teach?
So there's a few ways. So I don't think it's quite as integrative as what Sarah just described, but there's some pretty straightforward ways that I can do this. So I'm teaching a probability course right now. And one thing that I like having my students do recently is turn in a final project, just to show off, you know, how do they apply this subject to some sort of topic. And I gave them a whole big list of topics to choose from. They could also propose their own, but that's too many details. So so one of the projects that I have that, or a couple of the projects that I have them do are kind of baby versions of stuff I've worked on before. So I propose these topics to them and say, hey, these ones are really fun. I find these ones the best. Of course, you know, a lot of them flock to ones that are more major appropriate, but but you know, there's these very simple models of these probabilistic models called stochastic models that capture in some very basic way certain, say, competition dynamics between two species or something like this. And so I can have students study this, and then I can have a much better conversation with a student about that because it's part of my research than I can have without, like, a classifier from machine learning or something like this. So that's one way. Another way that I hope to integrate research into teaching is some of my colleagues and I really would like to develop a mathematical biology course, so an upper level mathematical biology course. And I think there's quite a bit of support for this within the department. And so that's just my research in a course. I don't even have to try to integrate my research there. It's just going to happen.
Thank you both for highlighting the reasons why so many of us are thrilled to be here at KSU in terms of that overlap between research and teaching. It's very rewarding, I think, for both the students as well as the faculty to be able to do that. I wanted to open it up to the audience now. Please feel free to type your questions into the chat or raise their hands. And I already see Cameron Coates has his hand raised. So Cameron, jump in.
Hey guys, thank you for doing this. This is very interesting. Quick question. So do you find that the species are more cooperative when the environment is unpredictable, or the more unpredictable it gets, or the more dangerous it gets? Because I say dangerous because sometimes danger for one species might be a good thing for another one. And then also in terms of your cooperativeness, is it just from a reproductive standpoint, or is it just a general community standpoint?
That's a really good question. And so there have been studies that have looked at social or cooperation in the sense of cooperative breeding, where there are helpers that will raise young that are not their own. And those species in birds and mammals and humans, those societies are more common in unpredictable environments where temperature or rainfall fluctuate in a way that's not predictable. So it's possible that the danger in those environments also is associated with unpredictability in those abiotic conditions like rainfall and temperature. But I don't personally know of any studies right now that have made the distinction between the danger versus the predictability of the environment. There are other studies in birds that have also shown that it's not always necessary to cooperate during breeding, but that group living or family living, even if you're not helping raise young that are not your own or not helping raise your siblings, for example. So group living is also associated with environments that are really variable and unpredictable.
Thanks.
Great. Any other questions? Well, I still have a few. So if anybody has any additional questions, feel free to type it in the chat or jump in with raising your hand. So Sarah, you are a behavioral ecologist. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is and maybe what types of people or students might be interested in pursuing that career path?
Yeah, sure thing. So a behavioral ecologist is really just someone who studies animal behavior and how animal behavior is influenced or shaped by the environment that an animal lives in. And so just like us, we can adjust our behavior constantly based on feedback from the conditions we're facing at any given time. Animals do the same thing. They can modify their behavior when their environment changes. And we assume that if they behave one way at one point in time and a different way at another, that they're optimizing what they're doing in order to have the best outcome. And so a behavioral ecologist just really studies the interplay between behavior of animals and the conditions that they're facing. And so all kinds of students could be interested in this type of career path. I mean, just any type of research is relevant to a broad array of career opportunities. Most of my students end up presenting at conferences, and those are really exciting communication skills that they may pick up. My lab also does a fair amount of outreach with the public and with high school. And so students in my lab also learn to communicate more broadly, not just to other scientists, but to other audiences, which is really important for a lot of careers. And then just sort of scientific literacy or being able to interpret a data set or analyze a data set is also really important for basically any career that I could imagine. And so I think that all those skills translate to various careers, and those are all things that we would do as animal behavioral ecologists.
Great. And Glenn, I'm going to ask you the same question. What is an applied mathematician, and what can applied mathematicians do?
Oh man, so this might be a controversial question depending on who you ask within the math community, but I'll give you my answer. So math can be very generally divided into two large general areas. One is pure mathematics, and then one is applied mathematics. Pure mathematics is kind of sort of mathematics for the sake of mathematics. It's proving all the stuff that you've ever seen in a math class. You know, every mathematical statement you've ever been told in any course you've ever taken from elementary school on had to be proved by somebody at some point. Otherwise, we don't know for sure that is true. So pure mathematicians are the ones who are proving these things, by and large. A lot of applied mathematicians are doing proofs as well, but the big, theory stuff is being done by pure mathematicians. Applied mathematicians, and again, in a very general sense, are using those the theory that's already been developed to answer new questions. So using math to answer stuff. So I mean, that's where the name applied comes from, right? They're applying mathematics to answer questions. And so, I'm on the very, very far end of the applied, the pure to applied spectrum. I'm the very far applied end because I'm using math strictly to study biology. There's a couple math questions I try to answer here and there, but for the most part, I'm studying biology. And that's really, anything that falls into, mathematical physics, a lot of questions from, theoretical chemistry. It doesn't necessarily even have to be applied to a science. There's questions from math subjects like just partial differential equations, if you know what this is. Most partial differential equations analysts are considered applied mathematicians. So it's a blurry line between pure and applied, but in general, applied just means you're applying math to solve questions.
Very interesting. I'm going to throw it back to the audience. So please let us know if you have any questions. Cameron, I didn't know if you had another question or if that's an old hand.
It's actually a new hand.
Oh, good.
So this one is for Glenn. So Glenn, I'm curious, how does one measure unpredictability? Without going too deep, do you use some type of predictability factor and you have different weights for different contributions? Or do you use some type of probability distribution? What's going on? What do you do?
Good question.
So that's a great question, because this is something that I had to think about for a while when coming up with this model. And you actually nailed it. It's a probability distribution. So, you know, the way that we're thinking about, the way that we're approaching this question is these birds breed seasonally, so they're breeding seasons, right? So we're assuming from one season to the next, there's the climate in between has been of some quality. And so, you know, and then there's some probability distribution that's determining what sort of quality the environment was, which is determining the you know, how easily they can reproduce, survive, you know, the abundance of food, etc. So it's the uncertainty is encapsulated for our model. This is certainly not the only way to do it, but for our model, the way that we encapsulate uncertainty is just by allowing the environment to vary up to a probability distribution.
And then you have, I'm sure other authors have done similar work and corroborated your results.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So there's there's a growing literature on these what are called eco-evolutionary models, which are studying how is evolution influenced by environmental feedback. And this is often done in the face of an uncertain environment, or what's called in the math literature is called environmental stochasticity. And so, you know, there's different ways that different authors are incorporating stochasticity into the environment, but it's usually something like this. There's some probability of good or bad, or some spectrum between good and bad, and it's defined by probability distribution typically.
Okay. All right. Thanks again.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Question. Paula Jackson has a question. For the model you are developing, which biological and environmental parameters are you using to feed your model, and how do you decide which ones to add?
So I suppose I should probably answer this one. I'll at least start. So this is another great question, because this is the sort of question that any math modeler has to start from. And so, you know, one thing to keep in mind is that the difference between a model like what we're studying and a model that you might see in a physics class, you know, a lot of the kinematic equations, for example, from mechanics, they come from Newton's second law, right? So these are derived from a physical law. And, you know, assuming you're making the right assumptions into this model, this is how particles behave. The models that we develop are approximations, and the ideal is that the approximations that we make match reality well enough to be useful. And so the question that Paula asked is perfect. That's exactly the answer. That's exactly the question that every modeler has to answer from the get-go. What's important and what isn't? And the thought process there is, you know, from the start, there's things that we know are important, because there's things that we necessarily need in order to study an uncertain environment. One, we need some way of measuring environmental uncertainty, which Cameron just asked about. And then we need, you know, some assumptions on how are these birds incorporating environmental feedback into their decision whether or not to breed in a season. And so in there, you know, I could go through the entire model, but I don't think that's what anybody wants, because that would take a few minutes. But the overarching answer is, ahead of time, we don't necessarily know what's important. So the approach that I typically take is throwing a lot of information into the model. You know, I'm going to assume that all the stuff we can think of is important, and then I'm going to sort of trim it down. So, you know, once we have a model, we can then say, all right, the behaviors that we get from this model, you know, through say simulation on a computer or something like this, the behaviors that we get from this model are robust if we get rid of, you know, say at first we were explicitly incorporating some like food component, some dynamic food component that the birds could eat and deplete. We didn't include that originally, but say we did. Maybe, you know, if we make that food component static, we don't let it change. Maybe we don't see any difference in the behavior of these birds. And so then we could say, okay, that assumption doesn't seem to be influencing the overall behavior of this model, and so we can take it out. And it's like Sarah said earlier, it's an iterative process. You know, we start from something, we start from a model, we try to match it, we see if it matches field data, and then we iterate. I think, did I answer your question? I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. Any other questions from the audience? Feel free to raise your hand or type it in the chat. And Paula says thank you for that answer. Anything else? Well, I have another question. So another strength of KSU is our emphasis on interdisciplinary and collaborative work. And you two are relatively new faculty at KSU. How did you go about meeting each other and finding this common interest to work together? And what advice can you offer other faculty in terms of finding people to collaborate with? Sarah, do you want to go first?
Sure, I can tackle this one. I have to give Glenn the credit here because at the start of the year, College of Science and Mathematics general meet and greet session, Glenn found me. And so I think he had an eye out on biology faculty that might do research that's related to his interests. And he approached me, and immediately it seemed like a great fit because he had been thinking about cooperation and the evolution of cooperation. And he was very familiar with stochastic models. And so that fit really well with the study system that I had been working on previously in the starlings. And I still work on this long-term data set. So our interests really fit perfectly. And it's because Glenn did his homework. So I don't know, tips for finding faculty, I guess just reach out. If you think someone has shared interests with you, it never hurts to reach out and ask, and you might find great collaborators that way. I think another strength of KSU is that we've been hiring a lot. And so I will say it's really nice within my own department. I have a small cohort of other professors at my identical career stage, which is really great. We bounce ideas off each other all the time. And Glenn and I are also at the same career stage, and we're collaborating on this interdepartmental project. But it's really nice to have a cohort of faculty going through the same things as you. And it's really helpful to sort of build that community that way as well.
Glenn, do you have anything to add? Since it sounds like you were the impetus of this collaborative working relationship.
I suppose so. Well, like I said, when you asked me what brought me to KSU, the evolution and ecology department it's got so much interesting research, and so yeah, I did my homework, and and fortunately it worked out very well with me and Sarah. So as far as establishing collaborative research goes, it's really just a matter, you can either get lucky and just so another collaboration I have on campus was because I was talking with somebody about my research and someone was walking by and said, hey, I work on the same thing. And then I started collaborating with that person. So you can get lucky, or you can just, talk to people, send emails. I don't think there's really a trick to it. I think it's really just talking to people.
Great. And Carolyn Elliott-Farino, who's our Director of Sponsored Programs, wrote that Sponsored Programs in the Office of Research is very much looking forward to working with you both when you're ready to apply for external funding. So we hope that that's sooner rather than later. So let us know what we can do to kind of help facilitate and move that along for you. So we're really excited about that. Any other questions? Don't be too quiet. A quiet day. Everybody must be tired on this Friday afternoon. Ian, do you have another question?
Yeah, so most of your work, Sarah, is field-based. Have you thought about animal systems where you can have them more laboratory-based, so it would make it easier for people to be able to look, and it removes some of the external environmental issues and certainly the issues associated with COVID? And maybe you can just share if you've been thinking around that and why and what particular animal systems you would be choosing to look at.
Yeah, that's a really great question. There are definitely lab-based bird study systems that you can pursue. There are also really cool aviary type systems that you can have that are a hybrid between a lab study system and a complete field-based free living system. So you can build really large aviaries and have your animals experiencing the natural environment, but still be captive enough that they're sort of easier to monitor. And so I know that UGA has a lot of aviary facilities that I've talked to some folks there, and they're always open to welcoming collaborators. But right now at KSU, I don't think we have a huge aviary space, so it's not in my immediate plans to bring starlings into captivity. And then, I had another point I was going to make, and it just slipped my mind.
So my question was, moving beyond birds, are there other animal systems that you would look at?
I mean, yeah, this research is really conducive to, my main work would be on vertebrates, but any vertebrate system you could ask similar questions, because we see these costs of reproduction and these associations between social behavior or cooperative behaviors and unpredictable environments. So it's definitely possible to work in other systems, but at some point in your career, you have to decide how generalist or specialized you're going to be. And so right now my resources are going towards these bird study systems. I'll just note, a lot of my work is also focusing on physiology and how that drives animal behavior, and captivity does alter free-living birds' physiology and their stress responses and things like that. So I sometimes veer away from captive studies just because you're not getting the true animal experience from being in the wild in their natural environments.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, it looks like we're almost out of time, so we'll go ahead and thank you both, Sarah Guindre-Parker and Glenn Young, for participating and sharing your research. Please feel free to reach out to Sarah or Glenn if you have any other specific questions. I think that they have many areas of expertise beyond just their content and collaborative work on the starlings. I think that there are model faculty in terms of collaborative research as well as undergraduate research. So I'm sure that they have lots to share with other faculty about that. I also wanted to thank the audience and all of you for participating. As you know, we could not do this show or what we do in the Office of Research without such a wonderful community at Kennesaw State University. I also want to remind you that to tune in next time, please visit the Office of Research website, where we post information about our Friday features as well as other activities. This will give you the web link for accessing our bi-weekly shows. The access link is updated for every show, so please look for the updated link so you can join us again. Next time on November 13th, we will be featuring Jessica Stevenson from the College of the Arts. She'll be discussing her research focused on African art from the 19th to the 21st century. And again, I'm Evelina Sterling. I'm the Director of Research Development in the Office of Research, and me and my colleague Bill DeYoung, thank you for participating, as well as all of our staff and faculty who work in the Office of Research, many of them who are on this call right now. And together we wish you a safe and healthy weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much.